Welcome to Tech Driven Business, brought to you by Innovative Solution Partners. In this episode, I welcome Dawn Solomon of Haworth. Listen in as she talks about her real-life experiences of SAP Business Planning and Consolidation, the BPC module. Specifically, how SAP is making it easier for clients, lessons she has learned during her journey, and more importantly, what you need to do to be successful with your implementation. Hello, Dawn. Welcome to Tech Driven Business. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. So let's jump into our session. Today we will be talking about the whole idea of how you go about implementing and managing BPC projects. How does it sound?
Well, sounds like a big project.
It is a big project, but not for you. You've been doing this for long enough, so let me get into the discussion. So, as I know, your background in SAP spans many years, and I'm sure you've seen a lot. What are some of the benefits and challenges working with SAP BPC?
Well, I think some of the benefits are that you can do it as a functional versus developer, ABAP developer person, and most everything can be done, within the BW system itself. I think as long as you have it set up the way that you're going to want it across, say, all of your entities, I think that it can be really powerful, and you can get a lot of consolidated reporting, which is really what you want to do. We've got it set up, to where you can do management reporting or you can do legal reporting, and you just have to make sure that you have all those requirements, and it's, when you're looking at a global implementation, it's important to capture as much as what you can from the global entities at one time. I know it sounds like a lot, but it's probably the best way to do it so that you can set it up, say, right the first time, so that you don't have to circle back. Some of the challenges, the functionality within BPC is easy to maneuver, I guess. There's not a lot of configuration with it. Like I said, most of it is the BW system that's really kind of housing a lot of the stuff. And then, using it with the analysis for Office tool, we're also using it with Power BI, and we're finding some of the challenges with doing that, right? Some of the challenges kind of entail keeping all of them in sync, right? You've got to keep the Office analysis tool up to date. You have to make sure that that's going to work if you're going to upgrade your BPC system. And I think that's kind of part of it, using that EPM add-in tool. But I think once you get it set up the way that you want it, it's very powerful, and you can create some nice dashboards and stuff like that if you know the right way to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the challenges that kind of stuck out for me, is when you talked about the integration piece, right, with other tools like the front end, like Analysis Office, or even with Power BI. So, do you have any examples of what were some of the challenges that you faced with maybe Power BI as far as reporting goes? Is that what the purpose was, or more like dashboarding out of Power BI?
Yeah, the dashboarding, and I think, some of the common reporting that you're going to do weekly was intended to come out of Power BI, whereas like all of your legal reporting and that is all coming out of the EPM tool. It's kind of convenient because corporate accounting can really manage that BPC system. Then they can manage, the journal entries and all of that kind of stuff. And it's very traceable within there, and they kind of keep it, that legal side of it, kind of separated. And they've kind of opened up that management reporting side. So I think the biggest challenge with Power BI is that you can't secure it like you can in EPM, right? In EPM, because it's integrated, it's using your roles and your backend roles within BPC for security, whereas in Power BI, we haven't learned how to do that at this point, right? So that's one of the things that we're working on is how can we, better secure it. So say if I'm, working in North America, I'm looking at North American numbers and I don't need to worry about excluding, say some of our other divisions, in Europe or Asia Pac or whatever. So I think that's one of the bigger challenges with Power BI, and then also the fear of, it's being used by finance members, and finance loves spreadsheets, and they can sometimes have a lot of tabs within one set of, a query, and it can be a very big challenge for the database to handle that, right? So it can be a big weight if it's trying to pull too much data. So you kind of have to learn how to restrict that. Sometimes, when you do it through security, it's almost easier because you're not pulling back all of that data and there's no chance of it. But when you're using a tool like Power BI, you have to really know what you're looking for.
Yep.
And I think like when you're using the EPM tool, it's almost more descriptive. You're kind of looking at it, and when you look at like some of the translations, you're like, well, what is this? And you can kind of clearly see that it's an entity, and then they'll put a numeric value behind it, but that's not what's in the reports, right? The reports is the description that goes with that. So the look and feel is much nicer than what we've had in the past. But I do think it's challenging keeping up too with some of the Office upgrades, right? So if Microsoft Office doesn't update in either Power BI or in Excel by itself, it can affect that EPM add-in.
Absolutely.
It can affect Power BI and how it works and how it retrieves. Sometimes you have to check a different box, but we have been really getting into some of the security really deep, and we've been learning, like a lot about how we can do that within BPC and within EPM.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been a big learning experience. And we've started to learn how to create like process chains and be able to run them under like an admin ID so that you don't have to give somebody the full admin role in order to just run like one process, say eliminations or something like that. We've learned how the tasks work. We've learned how data access profiles work and all of that and how they work together. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to, instead of it being so custom like it is right now, I mean, you could be all in the same group but have completely different accesses depending on what whoever was giving it to them gave them, right? Because there's so many different options. We're trying to streamline that and kind of do it by a team. And so we've kind of learned how to do the teams and create, composite roles and all that stuff. And we're doing all that testing now through EPM. And it works out really nice. That's why kind of the drawback of Power BI is you don't have that really to test with because it doesn't use the same security.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and those are the common challenges we see, like especially when you're integrating, your data with Power BI. Performance and security are the two major concerns. And even in my experience, I've seen a lot of customers have to come up with a whole new security strategy when you're working with Power BI. This kind of leads me into my next question. So you did mention a lot of different challenges. What are some of the lessons learned when you have gone through these challenges during the implementation? Anything that sticks out to you?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is if you're going to implement a system and you're going to have a partner work with you, I think it's important that partner has implemented that version. BPC has such big differences between 10 and 11 that I think it warrants somebody that's got knowledge in either both or at least 11 if that's what you're implementing. If you're implementing 10, you're great implementing with a partner that's implemented 10. But if you're going to implement with a partner, I would highly recommend making sure that they understand the system because, if not, you could end up having to do a whole kind of overhaul like what we had to do.
Absolutely.
And, at this point, we've stabilized, we're keeping up with patching and upgrades and stuff like that. But, lesson learned, get in there, as a COE, we should have gotten in there with the business members and we should have helped, to understand some of the challenges that we ended up dealing with, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do the MDX parameters work? How should a model be transported? How important is that, GUID? Nobody understands things like that. They don't understand how important it is to know how different it might function in that next level, right?
Yeah,
Because,
absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely. I think one thing I'll add, and this is a good segue to my next question also is, the example you gave, how to keep the business with you during the implementation, which is a great advice. But talking about this and then looking from a different angle, on a personal level, what do you consider your biggest accomplishment, either personally or professionally? I just like to hear because you've seen enough. So what's your take on that?
my biggest accomplishment, I probably feel like was personally was probably implementing our Europe finance sector. I probably learned more about European taxes, Portugal, Spain, all of this. It's different. It's really interesting, but it's really interesting how SAP totally customized their system for these things. And they definitely got it down to the country level, and it made it a lot easier. But it also was like a huge learning experience for me, going and implementing in the different areas, different countries, and trying to learn their laws, right? So when we did in the same thing with Asia Pac, it was a huge accomplishment to get them onto SAP, and then bring them. And it was like huge for the users to be able to access the data, because they used to have to go to a third party and request it.
Yeah.
So it was just a lot, those accomplishments, are probably some of my bigger implementation accomplishments. Probably just my general knowledge of how much I've learned over 20 years and how it's evolved and how SAP has evolved, how even BW has evolved, and looking at, what they're doing with BPC, and now they're looking at CFIN. My ultimate goal is to become an architect at Haworth. I would love to be, a finance systems architect would be perfect if they had the job opening, if they actually open it up. But that's why I said, keep the business alongside. But the business in our case took the reins and then left us behind. And that was probably where a partnership should have been, right? Because you need both. And as much as, even SAP will say, functionally, you can do all this yourself. You don't need to have an information systems team, right? You don't need a COE to help you. I think the background experience of history and seeing history repeat itself during implementations is a huge thing. Like I said, the requirements gathering. I mean, we just implemented we did success factors employee central. We're looking at ADP payroll right now, and integration with success factors and all of that using the APIs. This is all new and completely different than what they had before, so it's always a learning adventure every time you embark on another implementation. It's always new.
Yeah, so you mentioned a couple of things. One is partnership, right? And talking about partnership, we both of us, we have volunteered together for years at ASUG, America's SAP User Group, right? What value do you see that it brings to customers such as yourself?
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate of ASUG at Haworth, but I also am, if anybody that I had talked to that runs SAP, if they're members of ASUG, I definitely am a big proponent. But I've even encouraged our business members to log in and, follow the groups and see what's happening in other areas, because there's a lot of lessons learned podcasts and webcasts and things like that are available. And if you attend, you get the recording, so even if you couldn't fully pay attention to it, hopefully, you get a chance to at least register for it and attend at least some of it so that you can get a copy, a recording of it. I think that's really helpful. A lot of them they offer after the fact as well that you can watch later on. I've actually just even gone through some of the presentations myself that are out there, because you can find quite a bit on SAP's, help and all that kind of stuff. They have a lot of decent documentation, but it doesn't get you to what went well and what didn't.
Yeah, I think that.
What would you change if you were going to implement this again?
Yeah, and that's the key point, right? And I think that's the key takeaway, at least from my perspective, being part of this organization, and then interacting with customers and other partners and learning. There's so much to get from others' experiences and what they've seen, and how we can make it easier for your next implementation, right? And I know we talked about a lot of different things over this short period of time. Based on all that we covered, what is the one takeaway that you would want to leave the listeners with today? What would be the one thing?
Gosh, the biggest takeaway is probably, learning what those lessons learned are, listening to podcasts like this and trying to get out there to find out, hey, what worked for some people and what didn't, what seemed to be issues. I think the biggest thing for me is it's not necessarily, figuring it out what the problem is. It's the analysis to get there, right? So what is that going to take? And I am one that probably gets into a little bit of an analysis paralysis, because I tend to get off on my tangents and I'll just start digging, and looking for things, even if it's not my area to cover. I still do that. But I think the biggest thing is, don't be afraid to dig in and analyze it, and don't be afraid to reach out. And if you get an opportunity, like if you happen to be an ASUG member, and most people don't even know that they are, because anybody that's implemented SAP, I do believe they get like 1 year of ASUG for free. So that's how we got started in it, to begin with. And it's one of the only ways you're going to find other people in your area that are perhaps going through the same thing. But I do think that it's important to, probably the most important thing is partnership. I mentioned it twice. I mentioned it with your partner. If you're going to partner with a consulting group, or even just a consultant, just one person, you don't know. It just has to be someone that, has probably been there before, that they have a story to tell. And make sure you're partnering with your business, your functional business members, because they're the ones that know what they want, but you're the one that's going to help them get what they want. And absolutely. I think, it being the other way around, it's just too hard for GIS to come in behind, the COE, we're going to come in behind and figure it out afterwards, and we're going to do all this analysis. Well, if you can do that up front, and then hopefully when you implement, it's not a surprise,
Absolutely.
It's probably the biggest thing.
Right? And that is the key, right? To your point, I mean, having that ability to roll up your sleeves and do the analysis, and then having the right partnership to go along with it, I think it does take a lot of load off your shoulders, trying to keep it together and work together in a way that you are making sure that your implementations are going successful in the right direction.
Yeah.
So I think we are at the end of our podcast timing. So I would like to wrap it up at this point. I really want to thank you, Dawn, for sharing all the insights that you have learned through the process of going through these implementations, and then just being hands-on. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to Tech-Driven Business, brought to you by Innovative Solution Partners. Dawn shared a lot with us today, but her main key takeaways resonates with all of us. Keep learning. Don't be afraid to analyze and create partnerships both internally and externally. We would love to hear from you. Continue the conversation by connecting with me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Learn more about Innovative Solution Partners and schedule a free consultation by visiting isolutionpartners.com. Never miss a podcast by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Information is in the show notes.